Paul's Revolution. Please welcome the junior senator from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the home of the 8-time national champion University of Kentucky Wildcats, Senator Rand Paul.
I want to congratulate Brian Doherty on his book, The Ron Paul Revolution. I think he's got it right that it's more than just Ron Paul. It's a revolution. It's a movement. And it's part of the libertarian movement, but it is something bigger than one person. I think my dad would be the first to admit that the movement is not just him. He realizes that there's something bigger. And, he's fond of saying in the crowds, freedom is popular. It brings people together. No matter what walk of life you're from, what you do, what your personal background is, what your lifestyle, brings people together if government stays out of people's affairs. Now, this is kind of a young crowd, I think, out there. Anybody ever go see the Grateful Dead? There we go. A couple of people. I figured Brian had probably seen the Grateful Dead. I never got into a concert, but I got to the parking lot one time, and they used to hold up the tickets and say, I've got 3 in Cincinnati for 2 in Detroit or whatever. I guess they were planning on going to the next concert. And what reminds me of the Ron Paul Revolution in probably many different ways, but because I saw somebody in Orlando last week, he says, oh yeah, I met you in Iowa, in Ankeny at the Ron Paul headquarters. And Brian, I think, was there also, and the headquarters would be 250 young people from all walks of life, from all over the country, all working together in the headquarters. It always struck me that when you go to a Ron Paul rally, it wasn't everybody in suits and ties. It wasn't the Chamber of Commerce. You might see somebody with a tattoo. You might see somebody with a Grateful Dead T-shirt. But it was different. It was different in a better way, I think. People from all different walks of life were there. And I think he did make the message of freedom popular. Now, David talked about how people they come into the libertarian movement or Ron Paul movement by reading Ayn Rand. And I sort of did, but I kind of had probably nature and nurture. So I probably was born a libertarian, but also read the Ayn Rand novels and really enjoyed them in high school. You've seen some people backing away. They're afraid of Ayn Rand now. But because you like someone and you like the individual, it doesn't mean, oh gosh, I've endorsed every word in every book. But people are now afraid. And one of the funniest blog lines I saw recently was, Paul Ryan's always said that he was a fan of Atlas Shrugged. And now there's a blog line that says Ryan Shrugged because he's backing away from that. But when you go to the Ron Paul rallies, there are just so many cool things happen throughout 2 campaigns. Anybody ever see the Amy Allen Ron Paul Revolution song? That's a fabulous song. If you haven't seen it, look it up. She's great. She actually came and performed for him live when they did the Minneapolis rally at the same time as the Republican convention. She came and performed for me in one of my campaign events when my dad came and campaigned for me in January of 2010. But just bringing, I think, a certain sense of coolness to it that you weren't seeing anywhere else. You didn't have many candidates get on the stage. You probably haven't had any before, and you may not have any since who when asked about the war and asked about how to end it, said, we just marched in, we can just march out. Couldn't be any simpler than that or any less fearful than to say something like that. You had a guy who would go to the debate in Miami that's a Latin American-sponsored debate and say, we need to end the trade embargo. Castro's been there for 35 years. He's not going away, and he said that to booze. When he first stood up and talked about blowback, I believe in the South Carolina primary in 2008, he said that to booze. And he wasn't certain how people would respond. But interestingly, there was a lot of negative response, but there was a whole new positive response of all these new people. And I keep trying to convince the Republican Party, you may not like everything that he's presented, but at least appreciate your electorate's getting bigger. Your party's getting bigger. You need to welcome the Ron Paul people because they're people who maybe have been unhappy with both parties or been libertarians or been Constitution Party or been Independent Party. But they're coming in and you need a bigger party. One thing you may also never hear again in a Republican debate is, I think he said at one point that it doesn't say, blessed are the war makers. It says, blessed are the peacemakers. And I mean, will you ever hear another presidential candidate say that? I don't know. But that was pretty impressive to me. There is a continual battle, though, and the battle goes on, and there have been some things that we continue to fight. When we fought the Patriot Act this year, we got more no votes than we ever got before. I don't think it was 28, 30 votes, but that's still a growing movement of people who are concerned about the Fourth Amendment. And I said over and over to people, both in my campaign as well as when I've gotten here, is that you have to believe in all of the Bill of Rights. You know, so many conservatives love the Second Amendment. There are Second Amendment rallies. There are Second Amendment groups. There's not enough Fourth Amendment rallies and enough Fourth Amendment groups. But you can't have the Second Amendment if you don't believe in the First Amendment. You can't have the Second Amendment if you don't believe in the Fourth Amendment. So I think that there is a growing movement. I think there's a movement within the Republican caucus that I have lunch with every day that's becoming more libertarian. There are people that are no longer afraid of it. I say that the term conservative got kind of used up by people who weren't conservative. So we had a conservative president who doubled the debt with a Republican Congress. It's obviously worse now, but it was going in the wrong direction under a Republican administration. So the term conservative became of less value, and the term libertarian, I think, became of more value. We're still having the fights. We had the fight on the Defense Authorization Act. We didn't win, but we got close to some victories. One amendment Dianne Feinstein introduced was to say that citizens would not be able to be held indefinitely or sent from the United States to Guantanamo Bay. At one point in time, she actually was going to withdraw the amendment. Mike Lee and I sat there and said no. Once an amendment's introduced, they have to have unanimous consent to pull it back, and we said no. And that's pretty unusual. Usually if an author wants to pull an amendment, you just let them out of courtesy. We said no. We've got it out there, and we've got to vote. And we still almost won, but they introduced a watered-down version of it, and so we lost 55-45. But 45 people at least believe you shouldn't send a U.S. citizen from here to Guantanamo Bay. Interestingly, about 2 hours later, we had another vote, and they were voice voting everything. About 9 o'clock, every Senate starts thinking they need to go get back on oxygen or whatever, but it's bedtime. And so it's about 9 o'clock, and they're voice voting everything. And a vote comes up that I've been watching, and this amendment said that if you're found innocent in an Article III court in the United States of being accused of terrorism and found innocent, that you could still be sent indefinitely to Guantanamo Bay. Not that you just wouldn't get a jury trial. You could have a jury trial, be found innocent, and still be sent to Guantanamo Bay. And they were trying to convince me. Both the Democrat leader was Levin, the Republican leader was McCain. They both told me they didn't really like it. But sort of it's like, just get along with everybody, let it go through, and we'll pull it out in the conference committee. And and I was like, well, should I? And I looked back at my staff, and they were like pointing back to go. And I went back and I said, we've got to have the vote. And so all you got to do is raise your hand. I asked for a voice vote. And on that voice vote, it's the first time I was really actually surprised. And so were they, because Carl Levin was with me. Actually, John McCain voted with me. 51 Democrats voted no on this, and 8 or 9 Republicans. I think we got 59 votes, and we stopped something that is horrendous. And Carl Levin even said to me, but it's the law. And I said, if it's the law, it's awful. That you could be found innocent in our country and kept in prison forever. That's the law. If that's the law, that's awful. And for goodness sake, we ought to at least have a recorded vote. And we did, and we won. Out of the Ron Paul revolution, you have new people being elected all the time. Justin Amash is going to be a great congressman. He already is. And I think he has a lot of the principles of Ron Paul. We have a guy running in northern Kentucky who could be one of the top 5 up here if he wins. He's in a 7-way primary. There's 3 leading Republicans. It's a Republican seat, and he's either close to or at the top. Interestingly, a young man who I don't think I've ever met, and I don't think Thomas thinks he's ever met either. The candidate is Thomas Massie, and he has a good chance of winning. A young man who's 21 years old from Texas just put $500,000 into a super PAC, and he's supporting Thomas Massie. But he was a liberty-loving young man who I think had been to the Ron Paul rallies and things. But he just got involved in the race in a big way, and it's going to help him. That race will be a week from today, and if we win that, you'll get another libertarian up here. I think the attitudes of people are changing. I think within our caucus, I see some change. The Ron Paul revolution is having an effect, even on people who are already up here. People who would have always said they were conservative are now sometimes saying they're libertarian. In our caucus, we debate, and some are actually lamenting that some of us aren't so gung-ho to put boots on the ground everywhere. Some of us aren't so gung-ho to go to war without a declaration of war, or at the very least a vote in Congress. We still don't have enough, but when I introduced the president's words, President Obama in 2007 said, no president should unilaterally go to war without the authority of Congress. Sounds pretty basic. It's basically what the Constitution says. I introduced his exact words to see how people would vote, and we got a vote. We got 10 votes for his words, 10 Republicans. Not one Democrat voted that saying that Congress should have anything to do. Recently, there was a committee hearing, and Panetta was there. And they asked Panetta, they said, you know, what about going to war with Syria or Iran or both of them? And he said, well, if we do, we'll get permission from the United Nations. And they said, and he said, well, we will consult with NATO. And they said, well, we'll probably inform Congress what we're doing. We might. But there was no definite, there was no act that was going to occur before the action occurred, that Congress was very peripheral. That's our own fault. And it's the biggest problem we have up here is not only are we peripheral as far as being almost of no value and not engaged at all in foreign policy, we're the same with regulatory policy or any policy. The unelected bureaucracy runs this place, and in foreign policy, the executive runs this place. And no one attempts to assert themselves. I think that's the biggest challenge we have. I think the Ron Paul Revolution is helping us go the right direction. I think Brian's book will be a great value to popularize this, and I hope the Ron Paul Revolution becomes a bestseller.